Good afternoon and welcome back to the first day of the Times of India Literary Carnival 2013. Our next session's topic is a sexual predator, and it discusses the ability to say yes but not allowed to say no. We have with us Kaizad Kotwal, Urvashi Butalia, Shireen El-Faqi, who will be discussing the paradox of being a woman, with Purna Jagannathan moderating the discussion. We also have with us Eve Ensler, who's just running a little bit late, and she'll be joining us in the discussion shortly. May I request the panelists and the moderator to get up on the dais, please? A little bit about our panelists and the moderator before we start off. Kaizad Kotwal, an alumnus of Cathedral, is an artist and educator, having spent 22 years in the US before returning to India in 2009. He is an Emmy Award-winning art director from the US. For the past 12 years, Kaizad has been working in the arena of violence against women and girls, helping to raise awareness and funds towards combating this national and global pandemic. Last year, Kaizad received the Karamveer Chakra Award in Delhi for his work in areas of social justice and trying to combat and end violence against women and girls. He has also co-directed the Vagina Monologues. Thank you, Mr. Kotwal, for being here with us today. We also have with us writer, publisher, feminist, and historian Urvashi Butalia, who was born in Ambala in India. Butalia's writing focuses on the modern history of India and on partition and oral histories in particular. She has also written on gender, communalism, fundamentalism, and media. In 1998, she wrote the award-winning The Other Side of Silence, Voices from the Partition of India. It has been one of the most influential books in South Asian studies of the past decade. It remains at the top of India's bestseller list for over 6 months and won the Oral History Book Association Award in 2001, as well as the Nikkei Asia Award for Culture in 2003. Thank you, Ms. Butalia, for joining us here today. Joining us shortly will be Eve Ensler, a Tony Award-winning playwright, performer, and activist. She is the author of international phenomenon, The Vagina Monologues, which has been published in 48 languages and performed in over 140 countries. Eve wrote the New York Times bestseller, I Am an Emotional Creature, The Secret Life of Girls Around the World. She then adapted it as a play which ran successfully in South Africa, Paris, Berkeley, and off-Broadway. She is the founder of V-Day, the global movement to end violence against women and girls, which has raised over $100 million for grassroots organizations around the world. She'll be here with us shortly. Also here is Shireen El-Faqi, the author of Sex and the Citadel, Intimate Life in a Changing Arab World, which has been shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award. Shireen started a career in medical science with a doctorate in immunology from the University of Cambridge, before going on to become an award-winning healthcare correspondent with The Economist and a presenter with Al Jazeera English. She is the former vice chair of the UN's Global Commission on HIV and the Law, as well as a TED Global Fellow. Shireen sits on the board of a number of civil society groups working in the Arab region. She also contributes to a number of publications, among them the Huffington Post and the Independent, and has written and spoken widely on women's sexuality and HIV in the Arab region. With roots in Egypt and Wales, Shireen grew up in Canada and now divides her time between London and Cairo. Thank you for being here with us today, Shireen. Our moderator for this session is an actor who has just won the 2013 Amnesty International Award for her play Nirbhaya, Purna Jagannathan. And she is best known for her work, as we all know, in Delhi Belly. Purna, thank you for being here with us today. May I request you to take on the discussion from here?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a real honor to be here in this panel with such esteemed feminists. Really looking forward to the discussion. And last year was a eye-opening year for me especially, and I know for all of us. When our play Nirbhaya opened, I spoke to thousands of audience members, and it was incredible to hear their stories with sexual violence and from all over the world, and proving once again that sexual violence is indeed a global epidemic. And I remember the first day of the workshop of Nirbhaya, the director, Yael, asked, we were a group of 8 actors. She asked, who here has a story of sexual violence? And 2 of us put our hands up. And indeed, we did have stories of sexual violence. And when she went on further to ask, who here has been groped unwantedly, who has been touched inappropriately, all of us put our hands up. And those stories went beyond groping and touching. It entered into the realm of intense violence. And there was a story of attempted rape that a woman doesn't even consider violence. Violence is so normalized that we don't even call it sexual violence or violence at all. So really looking forward to exploring that. My beginning question is, I was speaking to a reporter at The Guardian, the international correspondent, the Indian correspondent at The Guardian, and he was saying before December 16th, there would be stories on rape that he would submit, and the paper would just drag its feet while reporting it. Now, the agenda from the newspaper is, please get as many stories of sexual violence as possible. He cannot get enough of them out. The question to you is India, on this topic of predator, is India being portrayed as a predator? And if so, what's the consequence of that? What's the good part? And what's the bad part of that, if any? And this is for all of you.
Well, I just arrived yesterday morning, and like a good first-time visitor to India, I picked up the Times of India to get the news. And what was remarkable in the first 5 pages of the newspaper were story after story of sexual violence, whether it was sexual harassment by former judges or domestic violence, rape of young girls in the home, questions of incest. It was quite remarkable. And I suppose to an outsider that might give the impression that this violence is rife, it's endemic. I mean, I have to say, coming from the Arab region, and many of you may know, particularly in the country of where my family live, in Egypt, we have had these tremendous cases, really tragic cases of rape in downtown Cairo during the anniversary of the uprisings, organized sexual assault, probably politically motivated. But when I look at this coverage, I think this is remarkable. Not India is a terribly violent country, but isn't it remarkable that you are talking so openly about sexualized violence against women, and on an occasion against men as well. And so it is the sort of open discourse that we still have difficulty with in many parts of the Arab region. And I think part of this open discourse that you have is the fact that you have a media which is more open than the media in most parts of the Arab region. But also you have a much more vibrant civil society. And that makes a huge difference in bringing these stories to light. So you can look at these reports as a sign of trouble, but to my mind as well, they are a sign of possibility and hope in terms of really tackling these issues, because we need to start talking about them.
Okay, great. Urshi?
Okay. I used to think that podiums were discriminatory towards short people. I've now decided that these sofas are as well. Because if I sit back, I'm like half lying.
You sit on the leg.
Yeah. If I sit forward, then I've got Purna behind me. I tried with my handbag to give myself a cushion. So if you see me sort of moving up and down, that's the reason. Answer to your first question, is India being portrayed as a predator? Short answer is yes. Is there any truth in it? Yes and no. How much truth is there? That is really the question. And what has it done to India to be portrayed in this way? I think we've seen in the last year is that there has been an inordinate amount of interest in violence against women in India in the foreign media. And India has been seen as the rape capital of the world and all of that. which if you look at the statistics on rape is completely untrue. But statistics is never a good way of judging anything. I mean, how does it matter if we say the number of rapes in India 2011 are far less than the number of rapes in America? Does it make us feel better? Because even one rape is one rape too many. So in that sense, I think it's not a good argument to make. But I think the portraying of India as predatory in terms of violence against women serves the purpose quite a lot of times of locating the violence out there somewhere.
For
And,
international.
Yes, international, and not looking at your own situation, at your own context, where if you just scratch the surface, a very different picture emerges. I remember talking to people, a group of women in Germany, and one young woman had been talking to a fairly senior politician, and he had made some remarks to her which are in the usual way considered by men harmless banter, but which serve the purpose of sexually diminishing the person you're talking to, almost humiliating, making them seem powerless. And she put it on her blog. And thousands of women came out and responded by saying this had happened to them too, but this was just something that did not get talked about. So I think really the unfortunate truth of today in the 21st century is that every society finds its level of violence towards its women, and it simply takes different cultural forms. But I don't want to make a nationalist argument. I also think that the fact that India was the focus of attention so much in the international media did serve one positive purpose. And that was to embarrass and shame our government and our state into taking action quickly, although that was not the driver. The driver was the protests that happened here. The driver was women's activism, which then spread out much more widely and which has in a sustained way been addressing this issue for the last so many years, unnoticed, but continuing at it. And I think it was that and the protests that actually pushed, and this sort of coverage gave it another kind of small push. So that I think is what happened. I also think that the question to ask is not necessarily whether India is a predatory country in
Or being portrayed as a
or being
predator.
portrayed as one. The question to ask is what are we doing about it? And I think it is pretty damn fantastic that in this country, as Shireen also said, we, that is civil society actors, women's groups, etc., have not allowed this issue to disappear from the public agenda. The media have helped sometimes, but they've been pretty dreadful at other times. But one thing you can see is that you seldom in the media now see the kind of discourse towards women who face sexual violence that you used to see 20 years ago. You do see a certain respecting of the norms, you do see a certain respect for the woman, you do not see the woman being diminished completely as used to happen earlier. And I think significantly our media, our activists are now beginning to open up to another question which has been silenced too long, which is sexualized violence towards men, which we don't talk about much, but which is there inhabiting even deeper silence than violence towards women, because where women are concerned, there are activists who've been raising the issue consistently.
Kesal, can you piggyback on that? Because I know you've been in this discourse for a very long time, especially through Vagina Monologues, activating this conversation. But you also mentioned there is an elephant in the room, which is sexual violence, men on men, as well. So, when I get together with my friends, there is always a topic of sexual violence that is discussed, and it is absolutely discussed within the last year, much more now than ever. In your circles, do you see that happening? Do you see these conversations being activated? And if not, what can we do to activate them?
I think that the discourse certainly has increased.
Yeah.
But to answer the question about whether we are predatory, we are incredibly predatory towards our women. I'm not going to sort of backstep on that at all, because if you consider how women are violated on a daily basis, and we're talking here about just sexual violence, perhaps one-on-one, or, the groping on trains and stuff. We have systems in place now where you have corporations that have privatized the water of villages, where women now have to travel further to gather the water because that's still largely their work. We're talking from a very urban perspective here, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about what's going on outside of the Times of India urban kind of world. And the further a woman has to travel to gather water or other things, the more likely she is to face violence. So it's not just the one-on-one male-on-female sexual violence or the sort of gang rapes. There is systemic sort of things happening in this country by the collusion of corporations, governments, and perhaps sometimes even the media, where women are being increasingly endangered on a daily basis. So, and frankly, I don't really...
Also, no?
Sorry?
The family also. The woman doesn't have to step outside the house.
Absolutely. But so and frankly, to me, it doesn't matter what the rest of the world thinks about whether this is accurate, whether we're predatory or not. I know and I believe in my heart of hearts that we are an incredibly predatory country, whether that's, the very Tony areas of Malabar Hill in Bombay, for those of you that know, which has one of the highest rates of female feticide in this country. These are educated, the most elite, wealthy people in this country who have one of the highest rates of female feticide. That's predatory. That's predatory towards our women. So I tend to have a slightly less optimistic, less hopeful kind of assessment of the situation right now. I think the issue of men-on-men violence is certainly an issue that has to be dealt with. But I think it's again maybe sometimes a bit of a red herring. I think that we need to talk about violence as a systemic thing again. It's, to